Hewitt, Hewitt, joined by Wisconsin Congressman Mike Gallagher. Good morning, Congressman. I have a question for you. When the Brew Crew comes to town, the first place Milwaukee Brewers, which is not really saying much because the Reds and the Pirates are in the NL Central Division, but when they come to town, do you go to Nats Park and do you root for the Brew Crew?
Hugh, I love this universe in which you think I have time when I'm in D.C. to stroll down to Nats Park.
Well, you're a congressman.
That's true. Under Nancy Pelosi's non-existent schedule, and if I
I
were
know.
willing to indulge in the unconstitutional practice of proxy voting, which I'm not, then perhaps I would have time to do that, Hugh. But I have yet to see the Brewers play at National Stadium. I'll put that on my bucket list.
Well, I'll tell you what, they've never been worth seeing, but they're in first place, so don't blink. Congressman, before we go to Ukraine, I have one question for you. You saw that the president invoked the Defense Production Act to produce baby formula yesterday. Did you take note of that?
I did.
Why don't they invoke the Defense Production Act to make gasoline?
Well, first, can I say this idea that the Defense Production Act is going to help us with the baby formula shortage is totally false. They're saying they're going to use it to prioritize ingredients. My understanding is that that's not exactly the issue. What would help far more is flexibility on the so-called WIC rules at the state level, as well as potentially easing import restrictions from trusted partners, whether they're European countries or Australians. And add on to that, the Democrats think that giving the FDA $24 million more after they just got over $100 million is somehow going to fix this. And the FDA can't answer basic questions about it. It's a regulatory problem combined with a lack of leadership problem from the Biden administration, not a lack of money problem or a Defense Production Act problem. As to your specific question on using the DPA for gas, I wonder if that's even necessary. I mean, Biden could stop this crisis by ending the federal freeze on new oil and gas leases, fast-tracking pending LNG export permits, expediting approval of all pipeline and energy development, just in general stopping the regulatory assault on U.S. energy development and financing. Oh, and by the way, kicking all the radicals that are out of FERC, that are in FERC right now, putting a wet blanket on our ability to build energy infrastructure domestically.
Well, I think the DPA is a magic wand. I think it's like Harry Potter, and if they brought it in and did everything under the auspices of the DPA that includes firing FERC, that would work. But I want to go back to the plant for a moment. I did administrative law for 30 years. Here's what happened. Some babies died. It's tragic. They did an investigation. They found some strains of bacteria in the Michigan plant, where's the plant? Is it Michigan? I think it's in Michigan. And so it's an Abbott plant. So they shut it down. They did an investigation. Those strains are not the strains that killed the baby. But they kept the plant shuttered because it's the FDA and a bureaucracy, and they didn't want to, they're hyper cautious. And the Abbott people got out and said, not us, it's not us, it's not us. Finally, someone called up and it might have been Ron Klain and said, reopen the plant. So they did a fake consent decree to pretend that they had done something that hadn't been done for weeks and months beforehand. It's pure bureaucracy. I hope when you get the Congress back, somebody has an oversight into that, because that was just pure administrative idiocy.
Well, my vision for when we take back the House, and I understand we'll still be in divided government, and so we're probably not going to be passing a lot of transformative legislation, but I think using our oversight powers, using those gavels we will have, using the subpoena power we will have, we need to take a look at all the ways in which administrative agencies, federal government agencies, particularly public health related agencies, failed us during the pandemic, and ask hard questions that force these bureaucracies to modernize and perform better in the 21st century, because they're still operating under a 20th century paradigm. And we've just seen so many manifest failures. They're unacceptable. Let me add to that, Hugh. There's a lot of ways in which we waived longstanding regulation for things like telehealth, take your pick, where we need to look back and say, let's just keep it waived permanently. Let's instantiate this into U.S. law. So there's a whole series of things we need to do when we take back the Congress. And I would put it all under the banner of holding people accountable. What my voters get most frustrated with, it's not the lack of this or that particular piece of legislation. It's this growing sense that nobody in the bureaucracy, nobody in the elite political class particularly, is ever held accountable. And until we start holding people accountable for failure, whether it's the FDA, whether it is the general officer class in Afghanistan or the State Department in Afghanistan, whether it's Dr. Fauci himself, I fear we are not going to gain the trust of our voters going forward. We have to inject some accountability into the federal government.
Congressman Gallagher, who will be chair of Armed Services if Republicans win the House back?
Mike Rogers will be chair of Armed Services.
All right. I would like you to relay a request to him for me. I would like two committees, not one. One that takes a look back at Afghanistan and one that takes a look back at Ukraine. Because the Ukraine problem goes back to 2012, right? It goes back to Barack Obama closing his eyes to Putin, leaning over to Medvedev and saying, tell Vladimir we can do business after the election, all the way through their occupation of the Donbass. And then Trump gets some scrutiny as well, Trump era. I think Mike Esper slow-rolled aid to the Ukraine's armed services during the course of the Trump years. And then this soft power idiocy that we engaged in right up until the invasion. And to today, I read a story this morning that we are thinking about sending Harpoon missiles. I mean, this is May 19th, it's May 20th. We are thinking about sending Harpoon missiles to our European allies to give them to the Ukraine so they can sink the Russian troops that are starving, ships that are starving the world by boycotting Ukraine wheat. I mean, what is going on here?
Well, I agree we need a comprehensive look at both of these issues. But this, Hugh, is actually where your thoughts about the DPA and your thoughts about Ukraine potentially intersect. Because even in a skirmish in which we are not a direct combatant, and which has only gone on for a few months now, we've already exhausted our supplies of certain munitions. So we need to go deep on the supply chain, not just for baby formula, but for missile systems, and figure out how we buy these systems more effectively, how we build them more effectively, so we can replenish our munitions stockpiles rapidly. We're out. We're in the red. And that's for, again, we're not talking about U.S. and China fighting over Taiwan directly. This is U.S. supplying the Ukrainians to fight Russia, and we've already exhausted supplies of javelins and stingers. We have a massive problem in terms of our munitions. The system is blinking red, and that's something we need to solve before it's too late. And that's an area where actually the DPA could be quite effective, and it's true to its original intent.
That is great. I have a third thing I need you to look into when you get the majority back. Because I got sent this by a retired Marine Corps.
Got to do commissions. Jeez, Hewitt.
You do. Honest to goodness. I'm not running for Congress ever, but I sure got a list. Yesterday, a retired USMC general sent me a story that I had to read 3 times because I couldn't believe it. The USS Vicksburg is nearly finished with being modernized. 85% of the way. It's been in dry dock for years. It's a heavy cruiser. We're about to finish spending hundreds of millions of dollars getting it seaworthy for its midlife thing, and then it's proposed for decommissioning. Now, maybe it needed to be decommissioned, maybe it needed to be modernized, but it didn't need both. What is wrong with the civilian oversight of the Navy, Congressman Gallagher?
By the way, the reason that we're losing so many vertical launch system tubes in the Pacific over the next 5 years is because we're decommissioning all these cruisers, right? And to your point, this is one that we invested over $200 million in, and the Navy is going to light that money on fire. So what's going on? The Navy's whole theory is that even though their plan wastes money, even though their plan has our Navy bottoming out at about 280, maybe 270 ships at the end of the 5-year defense plan window. So think 2027, it's the worst possible moment. We are going to be weakest when China is strongest. That's the end of the Davidson window when our top admirals are warning us that China may make a move on Taiwan. But the Navy is saying, well, we're going to bottom out quickly, and this will allow us to finally start to rebuild the fleet in the mid-2030s. That's too late. That is too late. Where is the plan for the short term? You know, we tend to think about this competition with China as a long-term marathon, and I get that. And I've used that metaphor myself, and we've all read the Pillsbury book, The 100-Year Marathon. But, and this is a big but, it could manifest itself as a short-term sprint over the next 2 to 5 years. And we are not
ready. Okay, but do we, okay, the key question, do we need to defend Taiwan? Because my Marine Corps general friend said they're already in the second island chain with the Solomon Island move. So Taiwan doesn't mean Japan falls. I mean, there are lots of assumptions here. Maybe the CNO and his team is actually thinking ahead of us. I'm open to being wrong, Congressman. Does anyone have a plan? I'm just confused as hell, and I'm a civilian.
If they're thinking 2 moves ahead and their first move is we're going to surrender Taiwan, then that's a bad plan. I would hope to God not. I have been on a 6-year quest to discover and understand the plan to defend Taiwan. There are pieces of a plan that I've uncovered. Nothing is convincing. And when I raise this publicly, some high-profile defense officials say, well, you just haven't been briefed on this spooky secret program or this or that. Bogus, Hugh. Not true. We do not have a simple, coherent plan. We're not moving fast enough. And if we lose Taiwan, fulfilling our treaty obligations to defend Japan becomes extraordinarily difficult, as well as the other treaty obligations we have in the region. You talked about the Solomon Islands as the second island chain. Well, it's Australia's first island chain. So we cannot afford to surrender Taiwan. We are not moving fast enough. Ukraine provides some useful lessons in terms of what we can do to have an effect and what we must do in the short term. But thus far, I have seen no evidence that we're actually learning those.
Last question. Do we actually not know what we will do if China makes a move on Taiwan? I mean, is it Mike Gallagher, Congressman, member of Armed Services, Intel's conclusion that we don't have a plan?
Our official policy is one of strategic ambiguity. So at best, you can say our response will be ambiguous. I don't know. And for those who say, for sure, we will defend Taiwan, and even President Biden has said that and had to walk it back, would the president have the authority to do it? Would Congress give the president the authority? That's why we need to work through these issues now. I would also clarify our policy of strategic ambiguity and make it certain that we would defend Taiwan, because I think there are real doubts about that fact right now.
Well, this is a bipartisan mess. There's no clear plan for the Navy. There's no clear plan for Taiwan, and I blame everyone. And I really don't think it's a partisan issue. Last 30 seconds to you, Congressman. It's not a partisan issue.
No. I mean, look at the debate we have in the Sea Power Committee. Joe Courtney and Elaine Luria on the other side are sounding the alarm as well, that myself and Rob Whitman are. So it's going to require a bipartisan solution, one that will transcend different presidential administrations, right? If we win the sprint and then we move on to the marathon, that's a multi-decade competition. It's got to have a bipartisan foundation.
Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, Rep. Gallagher on Twitter. Thank you, my friend. Have a good morning.